it's 2 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We will probably have a few more people kind of wander in, but I want to respect everybody's time. And thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited to be presenting this content to you folks, sharing rooms with you, seeing all your noses and your chins for the first time in a long time on a regular basis. I really appreciate it. Comebacks with Compassion is a presentation that really has been born out of my own personal experience. And I'll give you a little bit of my backstory, and then I'll go through an agenda and let you know what we're going to cover today. It's 2007, and I am on top of the professional world. I've just been awarded year-over-year sales growth recognition nationally by the Fortune 50 company that I'm working for. I'm also, back then, working remotely. I had an office out of my house. I set my own hours and determined when I was going to go see my customers, which meant that I didn't get managed very much, which suits me just fine, because I hate being managed. I was really exactly where I wanted to be professionally, but there was also something else going on in my life. Even back then, way before Elon Musk ever invented the self-driving car, I had perfected it. Because at the end of a lot of work days, I'd get in my car, and that car would magically transport me to the bar, and then magically transport me to see my drug dealer. And I kind of knew I was in trouble the day my drug dealer told me he was concerned about my drug use. So let's just pause for a second and appreciate that. Yeah. That's pretty much like walking into Krispy Kreme, ordering a dozen to go, and the cashier saying, "Really? Are we sure we want to do this?" It was a tough moment. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to pull myself out of it. I was living a double life. By day, I was this professional guy, walking through nice offices, talking to nice people, wearing nice clothes. And by night, I was on the streets of Seattle looking for hard drugs. It was exhausting, as you can imagine. And quite frankly, I was two people, but hated both of them. Emotionally, it was very draining, and I felt like I was in a very desperate place. Now, in 2008, some of us might remember something called the Great Recession. And I lost the high-paying job that got me so much recognition, and quite frankly, a job that I loved, but what it allowed me to do was to have my alcoholism and my drug abuse take over my life. Because I was working remotely. I didn't have day-to-day contact. Does that maybe sound like something that's been going on the last couple of years? So in 2008, when I lost my high-paying job, I was out of work for about 6 months, and I lost the job, but I hadn't lost the habit. Eventually, I landed work at another large national firm, but this job was a little bit different. I had to be in the office 5 days a week, which meant I wasn't able to hide my addiction and my use as much. And pretty soon, it became evident that my work performance wasn't exactly up to snuff. Now, I was lucky. The company had an employee assistance program, and I was able to use that to save my life and go to rehab. And after I went to rehab for the first couple of weeks, the fog kind of started to clear a little bit in my mind. And my thoughts turned to what my return to work might be like. What's that relationship with my manager going to be like? Now, I had told my manager initially that I needed help, and he very rightly referred me to the EAP, but what was that going to be like? How would I navigate that relationship? What were my coworkers going to say? Ooh, did people know? How am I going to manage work now without this crutch of drugs and alcohol that I really hadn't been using very well to manage anything, but kind of having those two things coexist really was the only life I'd known for about 10 years, because that's about how long it took for my habit to get that bad. What would that be like? Now, this big company, although they were really successful and luckily had an EAP, had no return to work program. So walking back in the door the day that I returned to work, after being out for about 5 weeks, was terrifying, quite frankly. And in a lot of ways, I felt like a small child who didn't know how to swim, whose parent pushes them into the deep end. No water wings, no pool noodles. You're just in there. It was really lonely. And that experience is exactly why I'm standing here today and talking to you about this subject. Now, my personal history, obviously wrapped up in a lot of mental health, a lot of substance use issues, but the things I'm going to discuss today are applicable really to any employees who are going to be out on an extended leave from your organization and then return to the business. And I want to be really clear. I'm not talking about workers who have been working remotely and now may be returning to some hybrid environment or in person. That's a different category, and there are certainly issues that may show up as a result of that. Unfortunately, I think there's going to be a lot of issues that show up because of that. What I'm talking about are individuals who take an extended leave of absence from the business and are actually disconnected from the organization for some period of time, who then are going to return and transition back into the business. So that's the specific category that I'm talking about. Of course, we'll take questions on anything you have today. I'm Ty Reed. I'm the founder of Recovery Career Services, which is a local nonprofit which provides career coaching and employment guidance for individuals that are in recovery from addiction, homelessness, and past criminal justice involvement. There are primarily two groups of people that I work with. People who burn their lives to the ground, so they're completely starting over, and are looking to get back into the workforce after some period of time and figuring out, how do I tell my story to an employer? Because that's kind of important, the way you tell the story. The other group of people that I spend a lot of time coaching and working with are working professionals whose careers have been impacted by alcohol or drugs in some way. And frankly, in a lot of cases, these people are just trying to figure out how to save their jobs. How do I reset my relationship with my manager? How do I refocus on my job duties? And how do I rebuild trust with my coworkers? I feel really honored to be able to work with both of those groups. All those letters behind my name just mean I'm a really lucky guy. Lucky to go to the University of Washington twice, go Huskies. Lucky to be a PHR, don't boo me, I know this is a SHRM conference. Lucky to have a certified workforce development professional certification, and also really fortunate and honored to be a certified peer counselor in the state of Washington, so I can use my experience to help other people who may be walking a journey of recovery. My website is at recoveryandwork.org. We'll have more of a chance for you to go and see that website a little bit later, but I want to cover what's going to be in the agenda. Three basic things. We're going to talk about employee leave. Everybody has a sense of the reasons why employees might take leave. I'll cover that just a little bit. I'm also going to cover why leave is likely to increase in the next 18 to 24 months. Next, benefits of a return to work process. And there are benefits on both the employer side and the employee side. I'll make sure I cover those in detail. And finally, what you're going to leave here with today is a concrete outline of how to set up your own return to work process. So I'm going to walk through 8 steps. I'll walk through all 8 of them. At the end, there's also going to be a QR code that you can use to go to a specially created page on my website, just for SHRM, where you can download a PDF of exactly what I'm going to be talking about today. So you actually have something you can take back to your organizations to help you construct your own program. Okay, we all kind of know generally what employee leave reasons are, but I just want to make sure I cover it. So an employee has a mental health or a physical health issue. They may also have an issue with a family member or a loved one. Could also be lengthy FMLA. Maybe your company has sabbatical as part of a benefits package, or they actually have some sort of other personal leave that they need to take. Now, why do we think leave may increase? First thing, COVID baby boom. Now, lots of folks thought initially when we were forced into isolation that there'd be a baby boom, but that didn't come to fruition. Why do people think that is? Any guesses? Divorce is not the answer, by the way. Okay. Human beings are funny. We're funny creatures. When life is uncertain, we hold off on doing certain things. If my income is uncertain, if I'm not sure if I'm going to have my job, I'm probably not going to spend as much money as I might have otherwise. And for lots of couples that are thinking about having an additional child or having their first child, the pandemic presented a lot of uncertainty. Do I want to bring a child into this world? If I do, what's the world going to look like? So as a result, lots of folks delayed having kids. However, starting last summer, when the conditions of the pandemic started to be a little more known, and we were a little more certain about what was going to happen. Yes, there were variants coming, but we were kind of handling those variants in an okay fashion. People became more comfortable. Last summer, researchers started to notice that there was an upward trend in births. So there was at the end of 2021, there was a 3% surge. 3% is actually a surge when it comes to birth rates because that was the largest increase since 2013. And analysts at Bank of America noticed one other thing. Now, what do you think that an analyst might look at that would help them say that there's going to be an increase in births? Sales of pregnancy tests. Sales of pregnancy tests, right? People are buying, there's a 13% increase in the number of pregnancy tests that were being bought. So they anticipate that this part of the year into 2023, there are likely to be a number of folks taking maternity and paternity leave, extended leave. They'll be out of the organization. The other reason, people exercising surplus PTO. For the last couple of years, a lot of folks haven't been able to travel to those exotic locations that they wanted to go to. Many companies have actually changed some of their policies around the amount of PTO that people can roll over in order to accommodate and recognize this. Especially if you have individuals in your organization who have been with the organization for maybe longer than 5 years, they might have a lot of PTO. And some of them may feel apprehensive about coming back into a more hybrid environment. Some of them might just want an escape and to go somewhere for 6 weeks. So people are going to start exercising that PTO. And then the last thing, effects from the pandemic, both mental and physical effects. So I touched a little bit on the, my substance and addiction journey. For the last couple of years, I assure you, there have been a number of your employees that have been sitting at home and drinking a little too much. There are employees who've been sitting at home and doing some drugs. And they've been kind of managing it, right? They don't turn on their camera on Zoom meetings. You can't get them first thing in the morning. You can't get them late in the afternoon on a Friday. There's lots of ways that people have been managing it, but as we move back into this more hybrid or in-person model, it's going to be really tough for people to hide. Also, the pandemic caused a lot of anxiety, depression, other mental health issues that are going to become more evident as we move back into this more hybrid or in-person environment. And physical issues as well. So stress, anxiety, increased cortisol, increases the rates for people to have heart attacks, strokes. People are going to be dealing with long-haul COVID. That may become an issue as well. And also, I don't know about you, but I ate a lot more ice cream in the last couple years than I'd eaten the couple years before. So maybe diets weren't as dialed in as they were before. Maybe folks kind of gained some weight and they've lost some mobility or some of their physical, their ways to move physically. And injury is going to become more of an issue. So more and more, we're going to start to see folks being out on these extended periods. And when I say extended period, what I'm really talking about is 4 weeks or longer. Yes, people will go out for a week here and there, maybe a couple of weeks, but being separated from the business for 4 weeks or greater really provides some unique challenges, especially around retention. We've all heard about the Great Reshuffling or the Great Resignation, whatever you want to call it. One of the biggest problems with people being away from the business for so long is they could start to get ideas. Well, maybe the grass is greener somewhere else. And if we don't work to create that connection with them, to keep them somehow tethered to the business, then retention can become an issue. All right. Henry Cloud, great author, actually has a quote that I really, really like, and it talks about the difference between seclusion and isolation. There's a difference, solitude and isolation. There's a difference between the two. And really the way that I think about it, solitude is by choice. Isolation is forced. So anybody in here consider yourself an introverted extrovert? Oh, look at all those hands. All right. So maybe you're like me. For me, I'm great. I can be on with people. I can be on stage. I can stand in my booth upstairs in the hall and I can interact with folks. But at some point in the day, I hit the wall. My energy's gone. And I've got to retreat into solitude to recharge my batteries, to revitalize myself. That's by choice. And that is connected to self. But isolation is forced. And many of us for the last couple of years have been forced into isolation, disconnected not only from our coworkers, sometimes from family members. And when you're in isolation, you can actually be alone even if you're in a house with someone else, unfortunately. And a lot of our employees have been experiencing this. So what does this all mean? Great, Ty. You're convincing me with the stunning charisma that you have and the words that you're using in your presentation. But what does all this mean? It means a couple things. Number one, retention efforts are going to become much more important. The other thing is that more employees, quite frankly, may be struggling in ways that we, either at levels we haven't seen before or in ways that we did not anticipate. So something to keep an eye out for. And then the last thing, it's an incredible opportunity for businesses to connect on a human level with their workers and show them that they care. And having this very simple and free return to work process is an easy way to do that. There's some significant benefits on both the employer side and the employee side. For the employer, now, when you construct these policies, this is probably not something you're going to go out and announce to all your employees. We put together a return to work policy because they're probably not going to know what the heck that means, and they're probably not going to really care. But it is something that once you have employees go through the process and coworkers hear about the process, that is going to help to demonstrate a culture of care and understanding for your employees, and that'll become clear why that's the case here in just a bit. You also help to keep your employees engaged. You're going to communicate with your employees when they're out on leave. That probably makes some of you uncomfortable because rules typically say, no, they're on leave. You don't reach out to them. You don't communicate with them. Well, that's not true. I'm going to encourage you to do that. So maybe I'll be fighting some resistance today, but hopefully not too much. Next thing, it's going to maintain morale and productivity, especially as they transition back into the business. Now, I'm just going to ask a quick question. How many of you here, if you're here for a day or two, are already worried about the number of emails you're going to deal with when you get back to the office? Right? This is just for a day or two. Now, imagine if you're going to be out of the business for 4 weeks, or 6 weeks, or 16 weeks. Even if you've got your out of office notification on, you're probably going to be a little overwhelmed thinking about the number of things that you're going to have to catch up on as you return to the business. This is going to give you an easy way to deal with that and help employees address that. And then finally, you're going to improve employee retention, and that's what this whole thing is about, and it'll become really clear how that happens as I roll out this process. On the employee side, also a number of benefits. Number one, maintains connectedness. It is really easy when you are out of the business for an extended period of time to not feel connected to the business. Often when people leave the business for a while, especially depending on why, they not only lose the connection to their work, but they might lose a lot of social cohesion as well, because maybe they're out of the office for a reason that they don't really feel like talking to people. Or maybe they're just overwhelmed. Maybe they're out on maternity or paternity leave and they're just trying to figure out how to be a new parent and keep their baby alive. And they just can't see their way they can't find a way in the day to reach back out to their coworkers or speak to anyone from the workplace. And so they're feeling disconnected. So going to help to maintain some of that. Less intimidation or feelings of being overwhelmed. Again, walking back into the office after a period out of the office. How am I feeling? Am I feeling comfortable? Am I feeling anxious? Maybe anxious a little bit because it's an unknown. Helps to preserve self-worth. And this is for better or for worse, many of us have a huge part of our personal identity wrapped up in our job title. I do this and this is who I am. And when people are away from their jobs for a while initially they can be recharged and they can actually be kind of happy. After a while, some folks, again, especially depending on the reason why they're out of the business, might feel like they don't have a place. They're unanchored. They feel less about themselves. So by keeping them connected, we're going to help to preserve that. And then it also helps to provide purpose. If you're going through an injury that you've been through and you've got to do PT, and you're doing this over and over again, and it's just a drag day after day, having a purpose and a reason at the end of the rainbow that says, okay, I can see why I'm doing this. I see the value of this, even though it's painful and it stinks most days, can give you a reason to keep going on that path. And keeping them connected to the organization is going to help to do that. What do we think the number one issue is? And just feel free to shout it out. I'm sure you're all going to have an answer, so don't fight each other over this. What do we think the number one issue is when managers are dealing or thinking about employees that are on leave? Yes, that's a good one. Anybody else? When are they going to be back? Yeah. Yes. You know what I hear in all that? Uncertainty. A bunch of uncertainty. Especially because in many organizations, certainly, if somebody goes out on maternity or paternity leave, you're going to know why they're gone. If somebody is taking a sabbatical, you're probably going to know. But in some cases, you're not. And so that breeds a bunch of things. You might not know why the employee is out, especially depending on the reporting structure that's in your company. They might go directly to HR and you might not know a thing about it. The other thing, you might not know how to communicate with them while they're out, or if you should communicate with them while they're out. Also might not know how to speak to them when they come back. Do I address the reason why they're out of the office? If they say something about it, do I respond? How do I respond? And then the final thing, you might not have any idea how to actually reintegrate them into the workplace. How do we get them back in in a way that doesn't disrupt the flow of work, but gets them back up to maximum productivity as soon as possible. Because in an ideal scenario, worker comes back to the workplace, they get back up to productivity, team keeps humming along. In an ideal scenario. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way. So when we talk about easing employee transition back into the office, there's 3 things that I like to focus on. Number 1, you absolutely have to communicate. Communication, communication, communication. Humanize the experience as best you can. And I think we've heard a couple of speakers, a couple of keynotes talk about this. You want to try bring this down to a human level and not try to fit somebody necessarily into a policy or a procedure. You want to collaborate with them also. Construct it on a case-by-case basis. Every single employee is different. Even employees that are out for the exact same reason are different. 2 employees who go out because of the birth of a child, one may be having significant issues because perhaps that child was born with some challenges. So maybe they need some accommodation in childcare, or maybe they need to be out a little longer to help their child get the things that they need, versus an employee who goes out and has no issues. So same situation, but 2 radically different approaches to those 2 things. And then the final thing, collaborate with the employee. Get them involved in the process as best you can to serve both their needs and the needs of the organization. Who here was in drama in high school? All right, we got a few drama geeks like me in here. All right, so setting the stage. Most of us think about theater when we hear setting the stage, and really what that means is conditions have been made right for something to happen. I'm going to tell kind of an embarrassing story now about how setting the stage showed up in my life. My girlfriend and I lived together during the pandemic. We still live together. It was, I don't know, probably about 4 or 5 months in. My girlfriend's vegan. That'll become important in just a second. So it's a random Tuesday night. I walk into the bedroom, candles are lit, music's on, and I'm thinking, all right. I turn around and I go back to the bathroom. My girlfriend's brushing her hair. I said, babe, how you doing? What's going on? I see you got some candles lit in there. She goes, yeah. I had beans and broccoli for dinner. And I'm just trying not to smoke you out of the room, okay? So the stage had been set. She did a great job setting the stage. I just thought the stage had been set for something different, right? So, I know, incredibly embarrassing. So, but she set the stage for something right to happen. Now, in this case, what she set the stage for was for us to be able to coexist in the same room in that evening once we went to sleep. But so often employers don't think about setting the stage for when employees return to the business, because their return to the business starts before they even set foot in the workplace. Way before they set foot in the workplace. And a lot of the stuff that we're going to cover today are things that you can do in their absence that will make their return much, much easier on everyone involved. So there's some requirements. Number 1, trust. Gotta trust you. And I hope that you have built up enough goodwill with your employees so that they do trust that you have their best interests at heart. If you haven't done that, that's probably another presentation that you need to go to, maybe some work that you need to do. But assuming that you have some goodwill with your employees, they're going to trust you as you walk them through the process. As you reach out to communicate with them, they're not going to think that you're calling to ask them when they're coming back to work. They're going to know you're reaching out from a place of compassion. As you walk them back through the door, they're going to know that you have their best interests at heart because you have communicated with them and you have collaborated with them. So that trust is really important. And then the word I'm going to use over and over again, communication, communication, communication. So important in every relationship that we have, work relationships, personal relationships. All right. So now I'm going to walk you through the elements of an effective return to work program. There are 8 elements. Before I get to the first one, I want to ask, is there anybody here that is an HR department of 1? Okay. I'm going to apologize to you right now because I'm about to put some work on your plate. If you're an HR department of 2, you can play rock, paper, scissors to see who gets to do some of this stuff. It's actually not that hard. The first thing, appoint a return to work coordinator. This is the person that is going to be the, people are like, no, not me. This is the person who will be the one who walks both the manager and the employee through the process. And I prefer that this be someone in HR because at some point there may be some privacy issues that you're going to be dealing with, that it really is best that it come from HR. Now, if you can't do that, I suppose you can manage it in another way, but I don't recommend it. It should really be somebody from the HR department so that privacy is maintained, policies are complied to. Second thing, so the manager, communicate with the employee when they're on leave, when they're out of the office, communicate with them. But this is absolutely not, when are you coming back to work? It's absolutely not, oh, we can't get along without you, making them feel guilty. It's not that. This is a one-to-one human thing, just to let the employee know that the manager cares about them, and if they can support them in any way, that they will. Yes?
Can it be the HR person instead of the manager?
It can be the HR person instead of the manager. Studies show, well, a couple of studies show, that it's actually more effective coming from supervisor or manager. Obviously, that's HR's job. And again, I'm absolutely not encouraging the manager to pressure the employee in any way when they're coming back to work or make them feel guilty. As a matter of fact, if the employee turns the conversation to work and talking about when they're going to be back, the manager should listen with empathy, but make it clear, number one, this is not what this phone call is about. You shouldn't come back any time sooner than you're ready to. And oh, by the way, if I can support you, please let me know. This is just a phone call to stay connected to the employee so that when they start to feel untethered, they recognize that they have value and that the most importantly, the company cares about them as more than the productivity that they bring. Human interaction, human level. There was a great speaker earlier, she's sitting right here, that said that in many cases, employees will work for less money if they feel seen, heard, and recognized. That's what we're doing. So HR is fine. I really wish it would come from the manager. I really do. And this does not have to be a big deal. As a matter of fact, most employees, if they're out on leave and they see the company's calling, they're not going to answer. They won't. Who would? So it's okay to leave a message with this. Next, manager or an assignee of the manager. While that employee is out of the office, kind of curate the communications that they're going to need to receive when they get back to get up to speed as quickly as possible. If you're out of the office for 6 weeks, hundreds, maybe thousands of emails could be waiting for you when you get back. That might be a little daunting to deal with. And that's not really going to help them be productive as they come back into the organization. Now, I say this fully knowing that if your organization does not already have rules in place that allow you to see an employee's email, that you may have to put that in place before you can do this. But if you do have those rules in place where you can actually monitor their emails and curate things, you should do that. If they're out on a really extended leave, maybe simply putting aside a number of emails isn't going to be practical. So some sort of executive summary with the key things that happened while they were out would be really, really important. And again, what we're trying to do is bring them back up to productivity as quickly as possible and not overwhelm them with coming back into the organization. So we're easing that transition. Notice, all of this is happening before the employee has even stepped back into the building. This is all work done beforehand. Next, the return to work coordinator. Schedule a call with the employee. So if you know when the employee's coming back, or one, confirm when they're coming back, that's probably a good thing. We can also, in that conversation, ask if there's any accommodations that need to be made for schedule. And there's a number of accommodations. If somebody's gone to rehab, maybe they have therapy, or they have 12-step meetings that they need to go to where they've got to leave right at 5 o'clock every day, or they want to go to them at lunch. So if we can make a reasonable accommodation, we need to do that. If someone is coming back from medical leave, this would also be the time to ask about any doctor's notes or any type of light duty or modified duty accommodation that you can make. Now, the manager could maybe be on this call. I'd prefer that they're not. I would prefer the manager's not on this call. This should be an HR thing. And then the HR person can relay whatever information to the manager is necessary that doesn't violate any privacy rules. So this really is, again, return to work coordinator and employee directly. This is also going to give the employee a chance to be heard, and they may have to go back and forth a couple of times. They'll have a phone call. Employee will say, I need these accommodations. Return to work coordinator will say, let me kind of put it together and talk to the manager and see what we can do as far as schedule, and maybe they'll go back and forth, but they're in collaboration with the employee, making sure that they get exactly what they need. Number 5, Then the HR and the manager, the return to work coordinator, will create that modified job description if necessary. Now, you may already have some light duty or modified job descriptions kind of in the bank ready to go, but even those will probably need to be modified a bit because, again, every situation is different. Even if people go out on leave for the same reason, when they come back, accommodations are going to be different based on individual needs. So this will give you an opportunity to do that. Now we're really talking about getting the employee back into the business. They're getting really close to coming back. Manager, reach out and schedule a return to work meeting. Ideally, I actually like this meeting to be scheduled a couple days before they come back, but no worse than 48 hours after they return to the business. And in that meeting, a few things are going to happen. I advise the manager to, number one, acknowledge that there might be some anxiety, because that's okay. It's all right for them to be anxious to come back. The manager might be anxious too. Never know. But to acknowledge, meet that employee where they are and acknowledge what they may be going through emotionally, because it could be a lot, depending on the reason why they're coming back. The manager will also take the time to confirm the details that the return to work coordinator told them about the modified duty, if there's any other accommodations for hours that need to be made, and really, really important here, if there have been any changes to the duties of that employee while they're out, now would be the time to tell them. Now, it's not because we're punishing the employee for being out, but sometimes the flow of work just kind of makes sense. Somebody goes out for an extended period of time. You transfer their duties to one or a couple other people. And you discover through the course of that it just makes sense for someone else to hold on to those duties. It's okay to do that. Please don't cut their pay. Please don't cut the employee's pay when they come back in. That's punitive, and that's going to be a whole can of worms. But it's certainly okay to let them know if their duties have been altered in some significant way that may change the way they do their job. Number 7, the manager. So the manager then would be responsible in some way for taking that curated information, that executive summary, those emails that have been gathered while the employee was out of the office, and giving them that information. I actually like for the manager to identify individuals in other departments or on other teams for the individual to get that information from. So it does a couple of things. Number one, it lightens the load on the manager. So that's just one less thing the manager has to do. The other thing is, there is, as I mentioned earlier, there's a social connectedness that comes with being in an organization. And if somebody's been out of the organization for a long period of time, especially if it's for reasons that don't make them feel so great about themselves, having them reconnect socially to other members of the organization is going to make them feel at home a lot faster and could make them more productive and certainly not as anxious. So reach out to some key members in other parts of the organization just to have them connect and be brought up to speed on certain things so that they are back up to productivity more quickly. And then finally, I talk a lot about a bunch of stuff to employers: second chance employment, treating employees in recovery a certain way or with respect. And I always encourage managers to have regular one-on-ones with their people. And I'm always amazed at how many don't. It's actually kind of shocking to me. So if you already have one-on-ones with your people on a regular basis, good on you. Keep on doing that. But for the folks that are returning to the business, try to have some stepped up level of connection or check-ins in the first 45 to 60 days. And this doesn't have to be a big deal. It can be just an extra email or two saying, hope things are going well, let me know if I can support. You also want to check in more often because their needs might change once they return to the organization. So they thought, before they came back, they thought I was going to look like one thing, and now they're back and it looks like something completely different. The manager just want to make sure that they check in. And this is, again, email, 5-minute conversation. Doesn't have to be an extra 30-minute or hour conversation during the week, but just some check-in with them to see how they're doing and how they're progressing. All right, so I'm going to do a quick recap, and then I'm going to take some questions, and then, but you can actually ask me about a bunch of stuff if you like. So number 1, there's many reasons why leave is going to increase. We kind of outlined those. Number 2, the transition back to work begins way before the employee comes back. And then finally, communication. That thing that my mom keeps telling me is important. Really is important. So action.